Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Lissa Weinman. I'm one of the partners here at 118 Elliott, and we're really pleased to be bringing you tonight Andrew Boyce's performance.
Hey.
And yeah, I just wanted to say that, climate, we got to talk about it. We got to do stuff and find solutions and get together around it. So a small part to that end is our climate emergency book series that this marks the first performance of. And the next one will be Thursday, April 20th. With the Progress Illusion and John Erickson from UVM talking about the fairy tale of economics and how the quote-unquote science of economics and what we teach to students in business schools and in economics departments is influencing how people see the world, and it's really a very kind of false vision. And he has a wonderful presentation, so I hope you all can come out for that, April 20th. And then Thursday, May 11th, we have the distinct pleasure of having our very own local author and preeminent expert on income inequality in the United States, Chuck Collins. His debut novel, Alter to Interrupting Sun, will be coming out in May, published by Green Writers Press. And Chuck will introduce Andrew, so I'm going to turn it over to him now. Again, thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to silence your cell phones. And if you can't see or you would feel more comfortable moving your chair somewhere else, just go do it. It's not going to upset anybody, okay? And have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Lissa. Big thanks to Lissa and John for creating this amazing space. So set up for the kind of conversation we're having tonight. Multimedia, art, everything. So it's a great honor for me to introduce my friend Andrew Boyd. He and I have known each other for 25, 30 years. We've collaborated. Andrew is kind of a rare bird. He's an activist, but he's reflective. He's spontaneous, but he's strategic. He brings a lot of interesting insights to things. And here are just a few things you may have heard of over the last 30 years. Billionaires for Bush. Anybody hear of Billionaires for Bush? A theatrical parody.
Can we get a huzzah?
Huzzah. Because the billionaires didn't just applaud and say yay, they said huzzah. Yeah. So they followed President candidate Bush around and cheered on him as the candidate for billionaires. Back before people were talking about billionaires. The other 98% is a group that predates Occupy, that focused inequality on the top 2%. But hey, they got it off. They could have, if they had the 1%, they would have captured. But anyway, so Andrew was very much a part of creating these kind of larger social means, ways of thinking about the economy. He's going to tell you about the climate clock, which is a meme, a tool, a way to get people to engage with this critical decade that we're living through. I think of him as kind of like a cultural scout. He's just constantly out taking in information, and then periodically he creates something, and then here he is in Brattleboro sharing with us the insights. So let me just say, this book is extraordinary. It was a long gestation, but worth it. I've read it now twice. I read it in earlier form, read it recently. It's sort of like asks this question: how do we feel? How do we address this impossible news? How do we address the fact that our concept of what our future, we hope like our children's future and grandchildren's future, is not going to be what we hoped? The heartbreak and the anger and the stages that we go through. How do we make sense and feel the grief and face the loss? And how do we find others? You know, Andrew says, how do we find the compassionate doomers and the tragic optimists and the people who still haven't quit and want to still put their shoulder to the wheel? How can we find each other? How can we be white at the end of the world? Well, there's an interesting reflection on privilege. Not everybody's going to experience the next 20 years the same way. How do we wrestle with that? What's your climate crisis Enneagram? Any of you ever done the Enneagram? Andrew's book will help you find your way to that. So with that, let me just say, you know, this is, you know, not just a book reading or conversation. Andrew has really sort of thought through kind of a more participatory way of talking about these themes. But I hope that, you know, I think the path to figuring out the future goes through our hearts and our experience. And as Andrew's book says, we want a better catastrophe. How do we navigate the climate crisis with grief, hope, and a bit of gallows humor? So let's give Andrew Boyd a Brattleboro welcome. Thank you.
You know, when Chuck talks about a privilege, he says, you know, you chose your parents well, you know, kind of as a joke about, you know. And I feel like that I chose my mentor well, and my comrade well, and I don't, I was like, Chuck's gonna introduce me, and I learned things about myself, you know, when somebody of this caliber introduces you, and so I am so blessed by my friendship with him and with Mary, and they're giving me a place to lay my head in nearby Guilford. Coming to Brattleboro on the train actually was 3 minutes early, if you can believe that. It always feels like a kind of a coming home of a kind. I think we have major homes and minor homes. I think New York City is my major home, born and bred New Yorker. I've earned my attitude, you know, and but Brattleboro and Guilford is definitely one of my minor homes. So it's very lovely to be amongst you all in one of my minor homes and probably many of your major homes. So thank you very, very, very much. And thank you to Nancy and Anne and everyone's, do I have that right? Everyone's books, yes? And Lissa and John and our lovely space here. She said she's going to arrange things in a sort of diagonal. And so we're in a diagonal, and I was like, I'm oblique, you know, that works. And so, yes, it sounds good. And here we are with lots of visuals and a beautiful sort of set of angles. And it's wonderful to be amongst you. It's an honor to be here tonight. So thank you. Thank you all. Yeah, so let's, I need to, and I imagine many of us need to, take a breath before we go into this difficult subject matter, even if we're going to bring some gallows humor to it. So let's all take a breath together. Okay, thank you. So yeah, I wrote a book. Here it is. I Want a Better Catastrophe. Navigating the Climate Crisis with Grief, Hope, and Gallows Humor. We're going to touch on all three of those. And the tagline, I think maybe Chuck alluded to this, is it's an existential manifesto. An existential manual. The manifesto was the last book. An existential manual for tragic optimists, can-do pessimists, and compassionate doomers. Do we have some compassionate doomers here today? Yeah, let's see some hands. Let's see some hands. Okay. Do we have some can-do pessimists amongst us? Yeah. Yeah. And how about some tragic optimists? Oh yeah. Good. You may notice I raised my hand all 3 times. Yeah. This book, I wrote it for myself first and foremost, and by extension, by writing it, you know, you write, they say the author writes a book that they need to read, you know, or they write the thing that is unsaid that needs to be said. So I think I tried to do that here. And it was very, like Chuck said, it was long gestation. It was a very hard book to write, partly because books are hard to write. And anyone thinking of doing so, don't. Okay, just like stop right now. Don't do it. It's just a terrible idea. It is both unpleasant and unprofitable. All right, so just talk to me afterwards if you're not convinced. By the way, Chuck will tell you the same thing. So it's also was very hard because it's about climate change, and climate change is a very hard issue, topic, predicament to wrap our heads and hearts around. So before we go on this journey, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey through our climate predicament. I'm going to read some passages, serious, grave ones as well as funny ones. And we'll also have a chance to talk amongst ourselves and connect and surface some of our thoughts and feelings as they, bear on this subject. So let's do that. Do a little bit of that first to get grounded. And get into our sort of hearts and minds, if you will. So what we're going to do for just a few minutes is find someone next to you, near you, that you didn't bring with you, that you ideally don't know very well, and tell them, and then maybe we'll hear a little bit of these as a group, tell them what for you is the hardest thing about climate change. What's the hardest thing about climate change for you? So find someone, share for a minute, a little bit more, each of you, and then we'll pull it back in. Thank you. That sounded like you guys had a lot to share. It's Brad. That sounds. Why didn't Roman Polanski say that at the end of Chinatown? Okay. Can we hear a few things very briefly? Does anyone want to share anything that? I see a hand back there in the dark.
Both my partner here and I, we miss our authentic winters.
Yeah.
It's been like a decade since we've had full
So
with skating and skiing and
yes.
Worry about our children.
Yeah.
And grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yes.
And worry that our children don't want children. Right.
Yeah.
I've never wanted to live on a different planet.
But until now.
No, never. I don't.
You don't,
I
right.
still don't want to live on a
Yes.
different planet.
not knowing what to do.
It's a real problem.
Missing the birds and the bees.
Where those insects flattered on your windscreen. Not knowing what to do. Yeah, missing things that we took for granted. A couple other things, anything? Yeah, I see a lot of, 1, 2, 3.
I feel so lied to.
Yep. Yeah.
Having to witness the suffering.
Yeah.
Everything everybody said, but one thing that makes me angry on a daily basis is when I have to throw a piece of plastic.
When you have to what?
Throw a piece of plastic away.
Yeah.
That angers me.
Right.
Because I can't avoid something.
Yeah, that's how
Being part of the problem.
being part, like being,
Yes.
being part of the problem. Yeah. Okay.
Grief over species loss.
Yes.
Grief over species loss. Any last thing? Somebody wants the voice? Yeah.
You remember the animals. Loss of the animals going extinct.
Yeah.
Right.
You know the movie Lion King, there's a scene between the desolation. They come out of a desolation and into an absolute green pasture. It's like a demarcation of land ownership, which it's a surprising lesson.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are hard, both losses and uncertainty. What's the right move to make? What's the next best thing to do? Things we took for granted that are being just the basis for trusting in them is being sort of worn away. the misinformation, the complexity of it all. Yeah. So it's a very, very, very hard topic, both emotionally and, intellectually, strategically. So that was the impulse behind writing the book, trying to grapple with that, with the dilemmas, the contradictions, the uncertainty, the just that unprecedentedness of it, all that. As a lifelong activist, Chuck mentioned some of the many causes that I've worked on. Hope has been an engine that sort of has powers us through. It's a kind of the emotional economy of social movements to some degree. And Nelson Mandela says it's always impossible until it's done. That kind of thing. And you keep plugging away, and then you sometimes win. Climate change feels a little different. And I think I'm hearing some of that tonight. It's, can we win this? Is it a problem we can actually even solve? Is it, we're part of the problem, somebody mentioned. Maybe that's more of a predicament, more of a contradiction. Are we the enemy, or is somebody else the enemy? I think there's a chapter of the book which goes, we have met the enemy and he is us. No, them, but still us, but mostly them. That's like sort of one of the dilemmas that the book sort of gets into and unpacks, and there's no easy answers to this. And so the book isn't really about, a hard policy prescriptions. It gives a kind of a repertoire of possible approaches and solutions, but it's not, here's the A, B, and C, and D of what we need to do in the nuts and bolts of it, or it doesn't debate with deniers about the science. It sort of lays out the science as needed to sort of understand our situation and our predicament. But it does get into the emotional landscape, the spiritual challenge that climate change as a different kind of issue that is civilization-wide. And we've already passed certain thresholds that, that prevent it from being a kind of solvable problem. It's more of a predicament that we have to face, that we have to survive, that we have to find a way to live through and adapt to and reorient to. So it's a different kind of problem than overthrowing apartheid or winning marriage equality. Those are deep and profound and have a civilizational aspect to them and complex, but there's a way in which climate change is just calls everything into question. Like, what does Naomi Klein say? This changes everything. Not just all our natural world and the things we could expect, having children and them having children and passing on the torch to the next generation and eventually winning these social struggles, but that changes all of that. It also changes what we need to do, the scale and speed at which we need to address this problem, and the scope of change that is required. It feels overwhelming. So that was sort of the impetus behind writing the book. Could I, instead of just trying to win, pretending like I'm sending all these emails saying there's just enough time, or we have everything we need except political will. All of these activist canards, and I find myself doing that in all the work I did with Sunrise, with XR, with the Climate Clock, with the Climate Ribbon, with New York Renews, trying to get a Green New Deal statewide. And then I took a step sort of to the side and felt like, how can I be in good faith with those things if I don't quite believe them? If it's bigger than that, if it's more complicated than that. So thus kind of the title, we're in for a catastrophe, but how do we get the best catastrophe that's still available to us? It's a really twisted way to think about it. But that's the premise of the book. That was the sort of realization that that's where we were at, and what does a strategy look like that that acknowledges that that's where we're at. And I had never had to grapple with that before, really. So that's the kind of challenge the book took on. And I brought in my traditional or classic sort of humor and creative approach, and a kind of trying to sometimes cook things down into these little chestnuts that you could use as touchstones and I went on a quest. I went on a bit of a quest. I went through a crisis of hope, and I was like, who's figured out, or who's on the cutting edge of figuring out what kind of hope works for us now, and how to stay grounded and stay sane and stay ethical in this civilizational polycrisis that we're in. So I went out and spoke with 8, well, maybe 15, but 8 ended up in the book, 8 leading climate thinkers, and sat down and interviewed them, and they really cooked over what they were sharing with me and sort of poured it into the book. Folks like climate activist Tim DeChristopher, who's kind of well known for his daring do in the Red Rock in Utah, and then going to Divinity School and starting the Climate Disobedience Center and all of that. So climate activist Tim DeChristopher, eco-philosopher Joanna Macy. Many of you have read her books and maybe gone to her workshops, and beloved figure in the spiritual activism and ecology movements. Sat and had tea and cucumbers with her in her little Berkeley apartment. Adrienne Marie Brown, organizational healer and visionary fiction pioneer, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, Indigenous botanist. I'm sure many of you have read her beautiful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and maybe heard her talk. So I went to speak with people like that and gleaned what I could and worked it into the book in various ways. So we'll sort of hear from them as I do some readings and as we do some more thinking and feeling and journeying. So that's the little bit of the backstory there. That's the premise. So I thought I would, I think we could start with, right. I know what I want to do. We're going to start in the heaviest place, and then we're going to work our way towards the light a bit. Does that sound like I guess that's a proper narrative arc of a kind, right? So we're going to start there because that's necessary. We just need to grapple with that. So we're going to start with the very first first piece of the first chapter after the prologue. It's part of a chapter called Impossible News. And the first piece is called We Are Where? And it gets us situated. And it's a heartful. It's a mind fuck. It's a heartful. But we already know that. And there will be visual aids. So look to the screen. Things will happen. Are you guys with me?
Yes.
Okay. So, this will be the longest thing I read, and then there'll be more shorter, funner pieces. All right. We begin with a quote from D.H. Lawrence, who says, "We've got to live, no matter how many skies have fallen." I think that's the first line of Men in Love or one of his famous novels. We've got to live no matter how many skies have fallen. We are where? Let's begin by getting ourselves situated. Does it work if there we go. Oh, actually, hold on. I forgot a little piece. That's why I have slides, to remind you of your sort of, what you're supposed to be talking to people about. So, like I said, the book tries to grapple with our contradictions. A contradiction is generally like this thing and this thing, which is the opposite of the first thing, are both true, right? That's a kind of classic contradiction. So we're going to look at 4 things, 4 statements about the world. We're going to begin with that I think are true and seeming like they contradict each other. But they're all true, and we're going to one of the things that we're going to do is hold them all tonight. And that's one of the things the book tries to do. So here's the 4 things, and then we will have visual aids. So as many of you have surfaced, I think we can make the case that in many ways the world is awful. But the world is also much better than it once was. Both, and I see some vigorous nodding back here from our patron. Both of things are true. Both of these things are true. This is also true. The world can be much better than it is. And I know a lot of people in this room are dedicated their lives to doing just that and have succeeded and will continue to prove number 3 to be true, even in spite of all the other bad stuff going on. However, this is true like always in life, or it has been true for many hundreds of years. However, this is also true, unfortunately. Yep, I'm sorry. Yep. Can we all join our friend here in a yeah. Okay. So all of this is true. All right, this is where we're going to begin, appropriately so. Let's begin by getting ourselves situated. You are here. You are here, a sentient denizen of a blue-green dot orbiting a humdrum star in the outer suburbs of a galaxy of 200 billion other stars, a galaxy that is itself but one of 100 billion galaxies in a universe expanding at 68 kilometers per second per megaparsec. And if you thought megaparsecs were just some term that Star Trek screenwriters came up with to sound scientific, you're not alone. But we are alone, or so Nietzsche has told us. God is dead, and as far as we know, we're the only creature in the universe able to fathom its unfathomable vastness. It's confusing. It's an absurdity, but hardly the only one. We fall in love. We know we are going to die. We do strange things like make art and dream and put each other in prison and cut ourselves when we're depressed and try to be kind when we can. And maybe even do something to make our little home a better place for the next wave of existentially challenged humans that follow us, because we know how hard it can be, and because we believe things can get better. Because we've been told, and many of us still believe, in progress. We believe that history, in the very broadest sense, works like this. Okay, it's not quite as smooth or linear as that, maybe more of a 1 step back, 2 steps forward kind of deal. Or maybe, in the spirit of Martin Luther King's celebrated and surprisingly line graph friendly claim that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, it's more like this. In any case, weirdly graced with an opposable thumb and the gift of gab, we rose from the primordial muck to burn fire, legislate laws, and paint paintings. With a fervid mix of violence, care, farming, and metallurgy, we upswung through time, through ages of stone, bronze, iron, steel, and plastic, until we were bending rivers, splitting atoms, and replacing hearts. Along the way, we drove the woolly mammoth and the passenger pigeon to extinction and committed unspeakable acts against one another. Yet we also eradicated smallpox, defeated Hitler, codified universal human rights, wrote symphonies, and went to the moon. And we didn't even have to do that. That was not in the book, I just added that. Okay. The past keeps handing us gifts and responsibilities, which we keep both honoring and squandering, and then passing on to the future. Our track record is decidedly mixed. But this continuity across time, this great chain of being, gives our smallish lives an extraordinary sense of meaning. So what if it turns out that actually we are here? Yep, I know. It gets worse. What if progress is a lie? Due to very sort of short term of the last 200 years, historical conditions, and we're on the cusp of a historic level catastrophe. This would be very unwelcome news indeed, profoundly disorienting, almost impossible to hear. How could this be? Well, Here's how Richard Heinberg, scientist, author, and senior fellow at the Post-Carbon Institute, and one of the foremost analysts of our energy future, explained it to me. In short, our rate of consumption is overshooting our planet's sustainable sources of production. According to the Global Footprint Network, humanity is currently using the equivalent of 1.75 Earths to provide the resources we consume and the waste we generate. Even worse, if everyone else in the world had US rates of consumption, and many, if not most countries, are trying their damnedest to, we would need 5 Earths. Well, we don't have 1.75 Earths, let alone 5. Newsflash, we only have 1. So we compensate by drawing down the future supply of non-renewable resources, which degrades the Earth's ecosystems and impoverishes future generations. To avoid, or at least lessen, the catastrophe we're setting ourselves up for, we will have to make a double adjustment. 1, to the simple fact that the Earth has a limited carrying capacity. And 2, to the slightly less simple fact that because of how irresponsibly we are currently managing it, that limited carrying capacity is itself being degraded. We not only have a 5 Earth appetite, we're not replenishing the 1 Earth we do have. Heinberg's conclusion, and that of many others who've analyzed the same trends, we need a planned degrowth of the world's richest economies. We need to partly power down our civilization, along with a fairly radical redistribution of wealth to soften the blow for us non-billionaires. Can I see a hand of non-billionaires in the audience? Okay, all right, good. We're all on the same side of that one. Wait, God is dead. We're alone in the universe. We know we're going to die. And now you're telling me that after finally clawing our way up the ladder of progress to some kind of half-decent, for some of us, civilization, it's all going to fall apart again? Well, the exact mix of chaotic falling apart versus thoughtful restructuring is partly up to us, but in a word, yes. Well, fuck you. Fuck you and the data you wrote in on. Actually, it's even uglier and more complicated than all that because we are also here. That's what climate change looks like all at once in 4-point type. There's a bunch of math in there, a lot of numbers and data and science and hockey stick-shaped graphs and possibilities and probabilities and trend lines and scenarios, and it can be hard to sift through it all, but here's the short version. And this part is footnote. We're fucked. Really, it has a footnote on it. I hadn't remembered I did that. And here's a slightly less short version, cribbed from the opening line of David Wallace Wells' 2019 blockbuster, Uninhabitable Earth. It's worse, way worse than you think. That's the opening line of his book. So, we have a choice here. We all have a choice. I can read this next 2/3 of a page, which is the darkest of the dark, the impossiblest of the impossible news, or we can skip over that and just kind of pick it up a little later. What would y'all like to do? I like to get everyone's consent. Read it. I'm hearing the reading it. Okay. Go dark. Go dark, man. All right. So we had we're fucked, and then we had it's worse, way worse than you think, and now we have the third. Indeed it is. Indeed it is those things, and to explain how much worse, here is the slightly longer, just a paragraph, slightly longer but still fairly short version from Nathaniel Rich's 2018 New York Times Magazine special feature, Losing Earth. This is very fact-checked. This isn't my words. This is one paragraph from the New York Times Magazine. The world has warmed more than 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. The Paris Climate Agreement, the non-binding, unenforceable, and already unheeded treaty signed on Earth Day in 2016, hoped to restrict warming to 2 degrees. The odds of succeeding, according to a recent study based on current emission trends, are 1 in 20. So this is not 1.5, this is 2 degrees. This is a much less aggressive target. If by some miracle we are able to limit warming to 2 degrees, we will only have to negotiate the extinction of the world's tropical reefs, sea level rise of several meters, and the abandonment of the Persian Gulf because it's just too hot to live there. The climate scientist James Hansen has called 2 degree warming a prescription for long-term disaster. Long-term disaster is now the best case scenario. 3-degree warming is a prescription for short-term disaster. Forests in the Arctic, the loss of most coastal cities. Robert Watson, a former director of the United Nations Intergovernmental Long Climate Change Organization title, has argued that the 3-degree warming is the realistic minimum. 4 degrees, we get Europe in permanent drought. Vast areas of China, India, and Bangladesh claimed by desert. Polynesia swallowed by the sea. Colorado River thinned to a trickle. Been reading the stories, that's already starting to happen in a big way. The American Southwest largely uninhabitable. The prospect of a 5-degree warming has prompted some of the world's leading climate scientists to warn of the end of human civilization. All of this is footnoted, blah, blah. Oh, and climate change is just one of several ecologically destructive macro trends. Combine it with deforestation, overfishing, habitat encroachment, ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, and plastic pollution, and the very web of life is under assault. The UN estimates that over 1 million species, including key pollinators, are now at risk of extinction in the next few decades with dire consequences for humanity. And I'm going to skip over a paragraph about non-ecological potential apocalypses because we don't need to do that. Okay, so we're still talking, but a lot of people, and even this climate clock here, which I'm going to turn on at a certain point, is still focused on 1.5 degrees centigrade because that is, when the South Pacific Islands start going under, if we cross that, and things could spiral out of control on the other side of that red line. So we're still focused on that. So we'll just begin with some data around that. To stay under 1.5, the global economy can burn only a fixed amount more carbon, which at the time of publication, another long climate change organization title, estimated at approximately 275 gigatons and dropping fast. This is our carbon budget. The maximum amount of coal, oil, and gas the world can burn and still stay under the 1.5 degrees centigrade limit. There's a different amount for the 2-degree limit, but we're basically blowing past both of them. However, this is important to understand the politics here. However, the world's already known carbon reserves are many times more than this, which means the lion's share of these reserves must stay in the ground. The rub, of course, is that while the carbon may be in the ground, its monetary value is already above ground, circulating in the economy. And most significantly, already counted on the balance sheets of the world's fossil fuel companies and petrostates. If you can't burn it, it's worth nothing, which means Exxon, Shell, Kuwait et al. Are likely sitting on a $14 trillion carbon bubble write-down. And we have little evidence that those players, of them foregoing profit for the greater good. And so the battle lines are drawn. A fossil fuel industry whose survival depends on burning every last drop, even if it means killing the planet, versus an increasingly mobilized citizenry, trying everything it can to keep it in the ground. Everything from carbon taxes to fossil fuel divestment, to pipeline blockades, to rapid deployment of renewables, to a Green New Deal. Meanwhile, the vast majority of people are still sitting on the sidelines. If industry prevails and we stick with a business as usual scenario, and pretty much all data indicates that this is what we're doing, we'll blow through our carbon budget in less than 7 years. That's where this clock comes in. It's part of a larger project. You might have heard of some of it. I'm going to turn it on here. Takes a moment to boot up. Can everybody, I guess there's people who can't quite, can everyone see it now? Everybody over there? Not quite. How about now? So what we have here, this is exactly, if we want to stay under 1.5, at the current rate of emissions, this is how much time we have left before we burn through our carbon budget. 6.5 years. So this is our deadline to stay under 1.5. If you've listened to this, it does not seem to be in the cards at all. Staying under 2 is something to reach for, but it's a very hard and a reach that we're not expected to make either. But that's the target that the movement and key actors are focused on, and we need to keep them focused on because that is what science says is necessary. Even if it's impossible, this is what is necessary, and this is what people need to be politically accountable to. We can't let anybody off the hook. So this is our target. It's our best first target. We can fall back to other ones, but this is our target. And so this is our deadline. And the way the climate clock is structured is one deadline, many lifelines, many solutions that we need to be moving forward on. Foremost among them is transitioning off of fossil fuels to renewables. We are currently at 13% of the world's energy coming from solar, wind, geothermal, etc. And it's going in the right direction, but it needs to get to 100% by the time this ticks down to 0, so it is not going up nearly fast enough. But this is humanity's existential mission. We need to get this to 100 before this gets to 0, or the closest we can possibly get to that. So that's where this climate clock comes into play. You might have heard it went up big in New York like 2.5 years ago, and then we created portable ones to put in the hands of activists and like basically clock, get in the faces of CEOs and governors and presidents and all the like, and hold them to account to what science and justice demand, which we sort of cooked down into the simplest form and made it live data in this clock. So that is our mission, and that's kind of the predicament we're in, that we're not going to hit our mission, but we've got to get as close as we possibly can. So we're almost done, guys. Thanks for bearing with, but this is the reality we're living in. So global temperature rise will, if we don't meet these targets, will continue on a trajectory of nearly 3 degrees centigrade. I think I last looked at the Carbon Action Tracker, which does a real-time tracking of what we're on track for, and it's 2.7 is where it's at. We can change that by what we do, but that's what we're sort of on track for right now, is 2.7 degrees centigrade. Increase or worse by the end of the century, and environmentalist Bill McKibben's words, we won't be able to have civilizations like the ones we are used to. But, and if you follow the climate story at all, you know there's always a but. That's not the only scenario. If a perfect storm of technical progress, enlightened government, and victorious social movements can force a tipping point of action and a World War II level mobilization to move the global economy off of carbon as hard and fast as possible, we could keep global temperature rise under, if not 1.5, then maybe 2 degrees. That would prevent the very worst outcomes. But at this point, as we've heard, even the best outcomes are not very good, which means my hometown of New York City will be partially inundated by water, maybe by the end of the century. Humanity's one and only home will be plunged further into a 6th mass extinction, and droughts, fires, flooding, and irreversible damage to critical habitats will give rise to hundreds of millions of climate refugees, widespread social chaos, and possibly some degree of civilizational collapse. That's the end of what I'm going to read for this section, but which means that we are here. So those are our options in the most absolute simplified form. We can no longer have infinite growth on a finite planet. We have to degrow, we have to power down. It's going to happen because we didn't do it 30, 40 years ago. It's going to happen in a very uncontrolled or only partially up to us, a crisis management kind of mode, as opposed to a crisis prevention that we could have done if we'd started over here. But so yes, this is the worst case scenario, worst case scenario. This is a very bad one. This is a better catastrophe, but we're going to have to go through a catastrophe to get to some better refooting for our whole civilization. Not 8, 9, 10 billion people, but 2 billion is what they estimate is the carrying capacity of the planet, and living in a very different way, in balance with the natural world and in a more modest, humble way that I think many of you are working on solutions around. So this is the simple version of where we're at, and it's the premise of all the thinking and feeling that I put into this book about how to grapple with this at all kinds of levels, how to grieve what we're starting to see, what's the strategy for getting from there to here, right? It's not a strategy of, hey, how can we keep doing what we were doing and just have it be powered by renewables? It's like a real profound rethink and refooting of our civilization. So anyway, we'll leave that up for a while. And what I would like to do, we could move on to the funny bits a little bit, and that will. You might not think that the chapter called the 5 stages of climate grief would be funny, but it is. I think I could step you through that, and it is audience participation. How does that sound for kind of dealing with all the stuff that we're bringing up today? There's definitely some id that it will call upon you to throw down, some F-bombs and some id. So I think it's a good thing to do. So this is the 5 stages of climate grief, based on or riffing off of, oh my God, my brain is, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, thank you. I call this, my proper noun server is crashing. That's what I call that. I'm sure you're all familiar with that phenomenon. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, psychiatrist, in observing people reckoning with the news of the terminal diagnosis of a loved one, these 5 stages that people went through, not in a linear march through the 5 stages of grief kind of way, but she just observed that our messy process of grief had these moments in it, and they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it felt like those stages, not just appropriate for an individual hearing the loss of the loved one, but there could be repurposed for all of us to reckon with all that we have to lose and all that we have to imagine losing, right? Because a lot of it is sort of this, like a prefigurative kind of grief. We know it's coming, and we have to sort of grieve it before it comes also. So that they could be repurposed. And because climate, the impacts of climate are so vast, I had to add a 6th stage. The 6th stage of climate grief is gallows humor. So there is a little pot of gold at the end of this, dark rainbow here that we're going to go through. But yes, so we're going to take a step through the 6 stages, in this case, of climate grief. And where is that? There we go. Okay. And I'm not going to read all of this. It's going to be much like a little dipping in and dipping out. So we begin with denial, which we have a quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which is, denial helps us pace our feelings of grief. And I came across 4 kinds of climate denial. One is the batshit crazy kind of denial. Marjorie Taylor Greene thinking that California forest fires are caused by Jewish space lasers. Okay, that's the batshit crazy kind of denial. And then there's the, I would say, ignorant, forgivable kind of denial. People who grew up in anti-science, very religious households, uneducated, or just trying to keep body and soul together and don't have enough time to dig into the stuff and hear some misinformation and believe it. That's a forgivable kind of denial. And it's quite prevalent. There was one study done that 39% of Americans believe that if things get too bad, God won't let it happen. Okay, so that's 39% out there. Yeah, so there's a certain, that kind of denial. And then there is an utterly criminal, unforgivable kind of denial, and that is the cynical, strategic denial that the fossil fuel industry and the corrupt, pieces of the scientific establishment and the political, what do we call the political? Right. Thank you. Enablers of the fossil fuel industry engage in, and it is designed to, basically protect their bottom line, which is a ecocidal. Their business model is ecocide, as we've seen. So I'm just going to read one paragraph that kind of lays out that logic, and you're going to join in. It's a kind of a call and response, and you'll get what to do very quickly, I think. So first, they say that global warming isn't happening, so we don't have to do anything about it. Then global warming is happening, but it's not caused by humanity, so we don't have to do anything about it. Next, it's on to global warming is happening, it is caused by humanity, but China and India aren't doing anything, so
we don't have to do anything about it.
That's right. When that doesn't work, global warming is happening, it is caused by humanity, and maybe China and India are willing to do something, but science will find a way, so
we don't have to do anything about it.
Until finally, sorry folks, global warming was happening and it was caused by humanity and previous governments could and should have done something about it, but it's too late now, so...
We don't have to do anything about it.
Right. So that's denial type 3. Then there's denial type 4, which is something I practice. And I'm guessing that many of you do as well. And that is more of a not factual denial of the science, but an emotional denial of the ever-present sort of, reality of it. Like one person I talked to in my cultural scouting talked about squinting at the apocalypse. We're all titrating this impossible news so that it doesn't destroy us, and that's a kind of an emotional denial. And I think it's necessary, and we should just be honest about it. And so I'll just read a tiny little bit of that. Because if we're honest with ourselves, I think we have to admit that we're in our own kind of denial. Right, and that there's a wisdom in denial. Denial buys us time. Our hearts need to gradually break open to the terribleness of it all. In this sense, denial is an odd kind of courage, a handmaiden to the will, hope's necessary accomplice. In the end, maybe hope itself is just a beautiful, human, productive, uplifting, and yes, necessary kind of denial. Those are just some thoughts about denial and its uses, and it's why we need it, why it's part of our journey through our grief. On to anger. The subtitle there is "We can, we must, we won't," which makes me really angry. I'll just read a paragraph and a half, and you will join in. This is the id. This is your F-bomb moment, people. You'll see how it works. Just gather up all the churning emotions and bring it. All right? Anger is a tonic, a truth serum, a cleansing fire. It can electrify your senses and put the world on notice. It can unlock your bile and out your secrets that were secret even to you. I rebel. Therefore we exist, said Camus in a provocative détournement of Descartes. Anger and the great existential no it makes possible is an essential part of our humanity. Without it, we tend to passively accept the givens and never find our voice. Okay, get ready, guys. And in our time of rising climate chaos, we have reason to be angry at nearly everyone and everything. We're angry at the messengers, at the scientists who tell us we're doomed. Fuck you! The cynics who tell us it's too late.
Fuck you!
Even the scolds who tell us to go vegan. Fuck you! We're angry at ourselves, at our own guilt, shame, and helplessness. Fuck us! Right? At our own contradictions as we suck at the teat of the very fossil fuel industry we rail against. Fuck us! We're angry at other people, at the folks who do nothing. Fuck them! At the politicians who do next to nothing. Fuck them! And the doomers who say there's nothing to be done. Fuck them! And hell, we're angry at reality in general. Fuck reality! for handing us this sack of existential shit and telling us to man up. Fuck! Whatever, just whatever you want to add to that. Just fuck. All right, that's anger. There's a lot more to it, but that's anger. And now bargaining.
Do you have to be a New Yorker to really do this?
No, you guys are doing great. You're doing great. You're doing great.
You came from New York, right?
Yes, I did. Today I was even there. Does it show?
No.
All right. And then bargaining, I used the device of the sort of, the apocryphal or canonical device of the frog in the slowly warming pot of boiling water, or soon, slowly boiling water, which, by the way, is not, it's a myth. It's not true. Frogs are smart. They jump. They jump out. It's humans that are dumb, right? So I imagine us in this pot and we're bargaining with ourselves about why we're not jumping out, right? So one thing we say to ourselves is, I've built a life here in this pot. They look around. No one else is jumping out. Sort of, surely it can't get any hotter, right? If I jump out, who knows what I'll jump into? It could be worse. Until it gets so hot that we finally realize we really do need to get out of this pot now. But what? Here's where we make our final stand. But is it really now yet? Can it please not be now yet? It's always now, of course, and with climate change, it needed to be now decades ago. But a part of us never wants it to be now. I don't want it to be now yet. I like my life and the relative normalcy I've been able to carve out of this crazy world. And for a little while longer, I want to keep pretending I don't have to live that life in the glare of a huge, blinking red global emergency button that changes everything. It's not unlike how we feel about death. We know we're going to die, but does it have to be now? Can it not be now, please? Can it just be always be a little later? Until exhausted, stalemated, and without reconciling anything, we finally surrender. And like the wise frog, we jump out of the pot into the unknown. So that's bargaining. Which brings us to depression. Anybody feeling a little bit of depression here? Yep. So the subtitle is Despair is Our Only Hope. So this is some people's absolute favorite chapter. It's only like one page. And I'm only going to read like one paragraph, basically. But it begins with a quote from this fellow, Philip Slater, who I forget who he is, but he said something really smart. And it's, despair is the only cure for illusion. Without despair, we cannot transfer our allegiance to reality. It is a kind of mourning period for our fantasies. Something it sounds like we need to do. The fantasy of infinite growth on a finite planet and all that goes with it, for example. All right, so this is just the very last paragraph, basically, of this little piece. After, someone going through his various, getting into his, why he's so depressed, and then, all right, I've done the climate math. I have no illusions about how power operates except, only in its own self-interest. I see no way forward. I am filled with despair. And then a strange thing happens. I feel fierce. I feel clear. I feel free. I don't give a fuck anymore. I've got nothing left to lose. I'm willing to take risks that I wasn't before. I say true things that are true, but that you're not supposed to say. And people notice. It turns out despair is its own kind of power, its own kind of freedom. And then I think, if enough of us fall into a dark enough despair, who knows what we can do together, people? This is the only hope I have left. That's despair. Then acceptance. I'm not going to read anything. I'm just going to tell you that I heard that sigh. That it turns on, I use the serenity prayer as a way to navigate acceptance. Like, it's basically a dialogue, an inner dialogue between our head and our heart. The serenity prayer, you could think about it that way. What can I accept about the things I can't change? And given what we've talked about, there's extraordinarily impossible to countenance consequences from the things that we are realizing we can't change. The red lines we've already blown past, the targets we've already missed. So somehow we have to do some acceptance around that, but we could also say, no, I'm not going to accept that, and then try to do the impossible, and that might actually, do some good, trying to do the impossible. But so it's a dialogue between our head and our heart. What can we, and then once we decide what we can change, and we try to draw that as wide a berth of things that we think we still can change, and then we try to change them. So it's like and then we reevaluate as we maybe miss that deadline or surprise ourselves. So that's the little device that I use in the acceptance. And then it brings us to the chapter you've all been waiting for, the 6th stage of climate grief, gallows humor. We begin with a quote from Soren Kierkegaard. Even though he died 200 years before or so, before climate change, he seemed to have our number because he said, our age is both comic and tragic. Tragic because it is perishing, and comic because it continues. I think 100 dissertations could be written about that one quote. Oh, and I forgot to mention, right, because I was about to say that my sponsors wanted me to, before I went into the gallows humor about climate change, wanted me to just say that climate change is no joke. In fact, it is possibly the least unjoke thing that humans have ever done to ourselves, and we'll have to sort of suffer through. But we're going to still laugh about it because it's necessary and healthy. And I will mention before I get into this that I have several corporate sponsors I'd like to just have a moment. I forgot to do this at the beginning, but I want to say that one of my corporate sponsors is Amtrak. That's what brung me here. And I'm going to try to do the entire national book tour without flying. So all by Amtrak. It's a poor excuse for a train system, but it's the one we got. Talk about infrastructure. This is a better catastrophe than other things. So Amtrak. Oh, and this mug was won in a bingo contest by the 93-year-old father of an ex-girlfriend, so it has great provenance. Mother Earth. Yep. Not a corporate, an anti-corporate sponsor. Here we go. Mother Earth, very important. And maybe surprisingly, Marmite. Why Marmite? Well, when the manuscript was received by the acquisition editor at my publisher, the very first thing he wrote back was, "You have written the Marmite of climate books." Which I was like, I don't know, is that good or bad? And he said, people will either love it or hate it. And that's what Marmite is famous for, including its Vegemite Down Under version. And in New York, or in my neighborhood in New York, there's a specialty store for even the worst of the world's cuisines. So I went to this Anglo-Australian specialty food store and got a little bit of this. And so I'm carrying this around with me as part of my little altar here. Marmite. And so I only want 5-star or 1-star Amazon reviews, people. Nothing in between, okay? You get to be the judge, but there's that. So those are my sponsors. And now we're going to read, we've established that climate change isn't a joke. And now here we go. We're going to begin with we're going to channel my mom, who died about 10 years ago. Obviously very important to me. Chuck met her, and Stephanie met her, and maybe a couple other people here met her. She's feisty and irascible, tiny Jewish woman who was an activist to her dying day. All Brooklyn attitude, and very difficult person to have as a mom, but also a very wonderful and lovely person to have as a mom. But aren't all moms some version of that, right? So we're going to channel. She's going to be our spirit guide to the 6th stage of climate grief, gallows humor, and we're going to try to approach climate change the way she approached the end of her life, and we'll see if it gets us anywhere. So, my mom had a pretty bleak view of things. Even though she counted optimist Elizabeth Warren and Bella Abzug among her heroes, at heart, she was a pessimist, even a misanthrope. She was down on America, down on capitalism, down on any possibility of progress. When things were looking bad in the news, and to her, they always were, I try to cheer her up with a recitation of all the little positive things that she may have missed. It never worked. In her later years, there was yet more to get her down. Her heart arrhythmia, her shortness of breath, the arthritis in her hips. She'd had both replaced, and then those replacements further revised. Her ulcerative colitis, they'd removed her colon, and for years she'd had to walk and sleep and eat with a shit bag tied to her belly. Her sinusitis, Andrew, it's like having a cold for the rest of your life. And on top of it all, the crappy black and white news, she was a traditionalist on the news front, dropped every morning on her doorstep. In those last years, I tried a different approach. Ma, it could always be worse. Worse? Yeah, I mean, you could be dead. Dead? Dead? like most of your friends. All 4'11" of her glared up at me. I carried on. Or I don't know. The next time you're squeezing shit out from that hole in your stomach, instead of eventually flushing the toilet and going back to your day, a crazed Ebola-infected alligator could lunge up through the pipes and bite off piece after piece of your fleshy ass in its slimy, putrid jaws. A chuckle. I got a chuckle. Things could be so much worse, Ma. Think about it. While reaching up to adjust the dial on the kitchen radio, you could lose your footing, and trying to catch yourself, accidentally spin the dial to a 24-hour Rush Limbaugh special, and then lie there on the kitchen floor in a crumpled, paralyzed heap with the "I've fallen and I can't get up" pager just out of reach, listening to the whole thing while your colostomy bag overflowed. Finally, she would laugh, and shaking her head in wonder at why her loins had chosen to produce this particular human to caretake her in her final years, she would be ever so slightly cheered. If it worked for her with all she had to bear, couldn't this same approach work for us as we face the bleak prospects of our climate future? When you hear the Great Barrier Reef is 30% bleached to death, footnote, take note that there's a whole 70% death bleachedly worse it could be. But it isn't. Shocked and dismayed that a climate denier was elected president of the world's greatest economy, largest economy? Just think. He could have been reelected, but he wasn't. Yet. There's so many ways things could be worse, but they're not.
Yes.
Thank you. So, no matter what the universe throws at us, no matter how terrible a mess we've made of things, if we can laugh in the face of it, even if we're also crying, even if we're also furious at the injustice of it all, then there is daylight between our circumstances and our victimhood. More than just a balm, gallows humor is an act of cosmic defiance, a reframing, a choice to tilt our gaze to the human, all too human muck of things in a cosmic, tragicomic light. Gallows humor is also a kind of hope. If we can still laugh, we can still hope. Not with a things are going to be okay kind of hope, but with a no matter how terrible things are, they're somehow still okay kind of hope. We need this kind of laugh. This tragic laugh, this rueful, heartbroken, accursed laugh. The laugh that has all the sadness of the world in it, but still laughs. On an average day, laughter can lighten our load, poke fun at the officious, point up the sweet absurdities of life. In a dark time such as ours, it can also be an existential survival strategy. As my good friend Dave Mitchell, not the famous author, but the less famous author, much less famous, but he's still Canadian, puts it, without gallows humor, all we have are gallows. So that's that section. What's our time like? We have a
7:46.
Oh.
We have 6 years, 130.
Okay. I think we should. You want to take a. You guys good? Yeah. You good? You want to take a gander through this?
Yeah.
And hear a little bit about the bring in the little justice component and the little hope thing, and then we close it out. Does that sound good? Yeah. Okay. So. I tried to put everything about climate change all in one place. It's vastly more complicated than this, but this is a pretty good start. And we're going to, it's kind of like a nonlinear table of contents for the book, a kind of mind map for all the ideas and dilemmas and scenarios and decision points in the book. And I think of it as an apocalyptic advent calendar. Every one of these is like there's a little apocalyptic bonbon behind each one of these little things. And in the electronic version, it should be you click here and you click here and you go to a particular chapter or quote or something like that in the book. The publishers were too cheap to set it up that way, but we can imagine that that's how it would work. And we're going to just step through a little bit of the beginning and then a lightning version of the whole thing and a tiny little bit on the justice piece or the injustice piece and the little hope thing, and then we close it out. All right. So we begin where it says begin. with our big, there's our big questions. And the first big question is climate change for real? And someone very poorly informed would go, climate what? And you come back to, is climate change for real? And then like a lot of people go, I try not to think about it. Is climate change real? I try not to think about it. All right, eventually you think about it and you go, nope, it's not. And then you say, you might be in denial. I'm not in denial. It's a Chinese hoax. I don't like your solutions, so it can't be true. Isn't the climate always changing? If it gets too bad, God will intervene. You may be in denial. Is climate change for real? All right, yes it is. Are we fucked? I try not to think about it. Are we fucked? I try not to think about it. And then you get to the most important question possibly on the whole chart. What do you mean we? What do you mean we? You could say, what do you mean we, white man? But it's just, what do you mean we? Because not everybody's having the same experience. In fact, extremely different kinds of experiences. And let's look at two sort of archetypally different experiences. And here's where it gets very regional in a funny way. So one option is, I'm going to escape to a nice farm in Vermont with my friends. No offense, but a lot of people are looking at Vermont, and you probably know a lot of people are showing up. And this is one scenario when people get really freaked out. They're like, this is what they think. And have the privilege maybe to do. Not everybody does. So there's this very different experience, which is characterized by, the apocalypse is already happening to me, and I can't help but think about it. Right? So very different experiences. So let's follow the folks who are headed to Vermont. Yeah. And so what I know. They know that things are broken and going to get worse, but they think, because I'm one of these people who, I have friends in Vermont, a very good friend in Vermont. He's got a really nice place with extra rooms in it. So I'm not, who was talking about being complicit, right? I'm complicit in this one, but I'm also aware of the larger thing, as I think most people here are. So what is the hidden assumption here by the folks who think, yeah, everything's going to hell, but I've got like an exit plan? So they think, however consciously or unconsciously, there's this sort of, the apocalypse is going to happen to someone else. That's the sort of implicit logic there, whether we're paying attention to or not. And the obvious question is, wait, who is this someone else? And this is where we get into our very first definition type thing. There's various definitions. The who is frontline communities who experience first and worst the consequences of climate change. We are disproportionately low income, of color, indigenous, from the global south, or labor in toxic conditions. So there's two extremely different experiences happening here. So let's go back to our people headed to Vermont. And then there's this sort of observation, you may be in emotional denial, if this is how you think about it. Or possibly a bit racist. Oh, it's complicated. No, possibly a bit racist. No, it's complicated. Okay, shit, I am a racist. What can I do? Leverage your privilege while trying not to virtue signal too hard about it. Okay, I'm going to leverage my privilege. I realize there's a huge asymmetry of impacts here. I'm going to leverage my privilege. And I'm really, really, really hoping once I do that we're all going to think about it as if we're all in this together. So we're all in this together. We're not all in this together. Objectively, we're in very different places, as we've just seen. And the folks on the front lines are like, nothing about us without us, right? If we're in crisis and we're coming up with crisis management practices and solutions, I'm at that table, and as one of the most impacted, I actually have knowledge that you need about what that's like and how we can best solve it. So nothing about us without us. And this gets back to, so we're all in this together. It's a question. It's an unresolvable question. It's a contradiction. It's a paradox. You could say, sorta, because we're in the same storm. We all share the same planet and macro sort of environmental conditions, but very different local ones. So we're in the same storm, but different boats. Or, yes, it's complicated. There's, climate change is also a crisis of forced migration, race, capitalism, and everything else. So it's complicated. So that's just a couple little parts of the flow chart. I'm going to read a little piece called "We're All in This Together." Not. It's very short, but that gets you'll see. It's part of the chapter that Chuck mentioned. that many people told me not to include in this book called How to Be White at the End of the World. But I included it anyway, and so far, so good. Where is that? I haven't, okay, so I lost my bookmark, but I will find it because I know my book half-wise well. All right, here it is. Yes. Okay, guys. We're all in this together. Not. Given the existential nature of our climate predicament, you might think we're all in this together. And in some ultimate way, you'd be right. But in every other way, you'd be so fucking wrong. Take, for example, white, well-off me. Am I all in this together with black kids in the South Bronx getting clobbered by asthma? Or Honduran climate refugees fleeing 3 seasons of crop failures? Or indigenous Amazonians being hounded out of their villages by wildcat ranchers and mining companies? Climate catastrophe isn't neutral. With disproportionate force, it hurts exactly those people, poor folks, communities of color, residents of the global South, who have historically done the least to cause the crisis. Wait, if they did the least to cause the crisis, who did the most? Asks my inner fragile white person. You did. You forced the indigenous to dig the gold and silver out of the new world that made the old world rich and brought black bodies across the Atlantic to extract the surplus value, that built the capital, that dug the coal, that drilled the oil, that made empires in the north, that colonized and neo-colonized the south, and poisoned the skies with carbon before the rest of the world had a chance. You did it. I saw you there. I wasn't even born yet. Okay, maybe you weren't there, but your ancestors were there and they did it. My ancestors were poor tailors in the shtetl. Okay, maybe not your ancestors per se, but folks who looked like you. And you benefited. And you're still benefiting. Odds are your family has 10 times the wealth of some black family across town, and that gap is growing. And climate change is no different. You've run up a huge carbon debt over the last couple centuries, and it's payback time. Look, I just want to help. Me too. But this struggle isn't just about recycling and putting solar on your roof. It's not even just about blocking pipelines and curbing emissions. It's about climate justice. It's about not always putting toxic dumps in the poorest black and brown neighborhoods. It's about making sure the people most impacted have a say over how the problems get fixed. It's about righting big historic wrongs. Wrongs that I or my ancestors or people who look like my ancestors did, huh? Alas, yes. And if you're still thinking the world is a beautiful, fragile, blue-green orb floating out there, self-evidently worth saving, and why can't we all just get along and stay focused? Don't be surprised when someone comes back at you with, it's a pretty picture those white astronauts took from space, but why should I trust you to come to my neighborhood with your solutions to save a world that's just going to keep fucking me and my people over? I don't want that to happen. Right, me either. So let's agree. Yes, we're all in this together, and no, we're not all in this together? Right! Yes and no. Wait, how can both of these opposite things be true at the same time? Ah, grasshopper. Now you're getting somewhere. So that's that. And now we're going to do you ready? All right, so here we are. It's complicated. Woo! Forced migration, race, capitalism. What is this? So what is the question? Can we fix this? I try not to think about it. Can we fix this? Okay, that depends. That depends on a couple things. It depends on what kind of problem it is. A usual kind or a wicked problem. We can get into that. There's a chapter on it. You can read it yourself. All right, that depends. What are we in the crisis of? Is it just one thing, carbon? If so, then, it has an engineering solution and it's a problem. But no, it's really a predicament. Okay, we already decided that. All right, because it's a crisis of our entire civilization. Food, water, health, diversity, biodiversity, democracy, masculinity, just stories, character, being itself. It's the whole civilization and all the stories we tell about it. Our ecological crisis is a crisis of everything else. Well, how bad is it? Well, you have 4 choices. Badish, pretty bad, really bad, and really, really bad. All right, let's say it's really bad. Okay, the collapse of civilization. Damn. Wait. Is it really the end of the world? Nope, just another Hollywood blockbuster. Can we watch it again? Okay, is it really the end of the world? Only the world we know. So can we turn things around? Or actually, hold on. One person says, noting that, says we must learn to die as a civilization. That's Roy Scranton, very interesting person. You should read about him. There's a little bit in the book about it. Okay, only the world we know. So can we turn things around? And this person says, I've got 2 kids, 3 jobs, and a pile of unpaid bills. You turn it around. But then, many of us say we did it or something like it in World War II. Must we? Well, yes. We don't have the right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. But wait, will we? I told you not to ask. The only question, and this is a Wendell Berry quote, the only question we have a right to ask is, what does this earth require of us if we want to continue to live on it? That's Wendell Berry. All right, so let's go back to, so can we turn things around? Nope. Or is it really the end of the world? Sure feels like it. This brings us to, so why bother? And there's lots of answers. I have kids. That's one answer. That's why bother. And then there's a question, but should we even bring kids into such a world? And a lot of people will answer, oops, already did. So in any case, so why bother? Well, survival, just survival. That's like deep in our bones, okay? Solidarity. I can't lose hope when other people can't afford to. That's also in the How to Be White at the End of the World chapter. Legacy. What kind of ancestor do you want to be? And you have 2 choices, a dick or not a dick. All right? All right. There's a lot more here, but a lot of these things lead us all back to this question, which is the central question of the acceptance part of the 5th stage, which is we must awake to our burdens. How do we awake to our burdens? So everything sort of comes back to here. And then we might go through a bunch of other things. This is the is it now yet part. And then we'll go to this other very important thing. What will it take? Once we decide to awake to our burdens, what will it take? And there's a lot of things. Fewer showers, for example. And then there's this, not sure you appreciate the scale of the problem. All right. What will it take? Serious tech. Yep. Powering down. We already covered degrowth. Community resilience. You guys are probably doing a lot of that here. And here's a quote from Rob Hopkins, the head of the transition town, or the leader of the transition towns movement. Community resilience, grassroots resistance, right? Like blocking pipelines, all that kind of stuff. Better stories. Robin Wall Kimmerer has a lot to say about that. Like, we don't have to think of ourselves as takers. We can sort of find our way back to being good partners with the earth. That's part of telling better stories. Stronger policy. Grassroots resistance, social revolution, and basically we need all of those. So we come to everything and everyone, though there's a caveat on everything, because actually it's just some things, because we don't want fake solutions, we only want real solutions. So you ask the question, is it a real solution? And it says, nope, just more fake greenwashing bullshit. So we have to sort of go through that whole filter. Okay, if it's a real solution, cool. Is it a just and democratic solution? Nope. Just the same old inequality and exploitation, only now powered by renewables. Okay, so we have to go through that filter. So once we go through both of those filters, we can ask the question, is there still time? But jumping back here, everything and everyone, who is that? Well, it's everyone and everything. And like Chuck was saying in the apocalyptic Enneagram, I sort of break it down into archetypes. And whatever archetype you're currently, are for your whole life or are currently channeling, I list many things you can do, and that's in an appendix to the book, for example. So there's like artist, engineer, visionary engineer, storyteller, philosopher, good neighbor, warrior, etc. So we need all of us. So let's do this. And then we come to this very difficult question. Is there still time? One possibility, nope, we totally blew it. And that brings us into the end of everything up here. But maybe there's different. Maybe there's still time. Yes, there's still time. Or Howard Zinn suggests time schmime. He didn't actually say that, but here's what he did say. To live now as we think human beings should live in defiance of all that is bad around us is itself a marvelous victory. So time schmime. Yeah, there we go. Time schmime is one other option. Or we end up in no, there's not still time. It's way too late-ish, right? And that's one piece of a contradiction, because the other thing that is true right alongside it is never too late, right? Yes, we've blown past certain, ecological red lines, and we're not going to be able to claw back. We're just going to have to figure out how to live on a somewhat permanently devastated planet. We've done some permanent damage to our one and only home, but it is also never too late to act in defense of people and the planet. It's never too late to be kind. It's never too late to do your neighbor a good turn. It's never too late to make things less worse, right? So these are both true. It's never too late. We're going to just skip over this for now, just in the interest of time, but everything, of course, because this is obviously just an extremely, conniving marketing plan. It all ends up at I want a better catastrophe, and here's a QR code that, once you point your phone at that, your credit card is immediately deducted $29.99, and a book is sent by an Amazon drone to you and dropped on your head, okay? So be careful pointing your phone here. So anyway, this is, I'm just going to end with this, or just want to share this one Robin Wall Kimmerer quote about how do you want to fall apart? And she says, with gratitude, and here's why. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. So it's not just about what our possibilities and probabilities are. It's about what is the right thing to do. What is our ethics? What is the best part of our upbringing and traditions, guiding us to do? And this book is full of that. There's so many things I could share with you right now. And I just want to do a time check and figure out where you all are. I could read like one paragraph or two about hope, and then we could do a little, just a sort of sharing, a tiny sharing of like the amazing things that many people in this room are doing to address this. Do we people have 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Where are we at? Time to wrap up, feeling? 5. Okay, we're going to do 5 minutes. I'm just going to share with you some wisdom, quick wisdom, and 1 or 2 sentences. So when I spoke with, there's some things I learned. Here, we're headed down. How do we want to head down? One powerful story that I learned, partly through Chuck and his work with the Post-Carbon Institute, was a story we can tell about our near, medium, and possibly far future. There are different ways to decline. And there's a chapter in the book about how do we want to decline, basically, how to decline. So this is the metaphor of, no, we're not going off a cliff. No, it's not all over, except for the lady, the fat lady singing. We are in for a rough patch, but we can have agency if we imagine ourselves caught in a rapids that's pulling us downwards, but we are in a canoe. The canoe of our civilization is navigating, is rafting these violent rapids that are pulling us in a downward direction. But there's places for us to get our paddle in where we can avoid the worst kind of shipwrecks and finally get to calmer waters that may be less than we had imagined for ourselves. But that kind of metaphor, no, we're not going off a cliff, we are navigating down a dangerous rapids, is a story that has agency. It has story that has honesty, and it has a story that has possibility. It's a bit of a dark story, but we're in a dark time. So part of what the book did was find things like this that could be soul food for all of us and guidance for all of us. Sometimes it's a story. Sometimes it's a strategy like degrowth. Sometimes it's a joke. But let me just share one tiny, 2 sentences here. It's not a philosophical investigation into hope. It's just 4 lines, which come at the very beginning of the book, actually, when I kind of am navigating my own hope and hopelessness. And here's the existential role of social movements in that. And this was after the biggest climate mobilization in history, single day of mobilization in history, the People's Climate March in 2014 in the streets of New York, 400,000 people marching for climate justice, for a global treaty, which we did get in Paris, a year later, and it was a crucial moment. And I was battling with hope and hopelessness, and at the end of that day, when people showed up who I knew were hopeless or vacillating around it, I said, I realized that day A social movement is just a crush of people carrying each other forward, each of us fighting our inner demons, the temporarily hopeless, tag teaming the temporarily hopeful, and trading back again in a constant existential solidarity pact. So there's people here today who are hopeful, more hopeful than others, and people who are hopeless, and that will shift and change and fluid. So let's take care of each other. Let's get each other through the bad patches. And let's, if there's any sharing to be done, if there's people, if people could raise their hand who are working on projects in this region or in this community, and there are other people who are looking for projects to work on, can we just have the hands raised of people who I can find something meaningful for you to do here in Brattleboro, here in southern Vermont? Can we just see some hands? And then anyone looking to talk to somebody like that can find them. So let's just put some hands up. And those people looking, put your hands up really high so people can see. What's your name?
My name is Mike Mayer.
Mike Mayer has some beautiful things he's doing in town. What's your name?
Nancy Detra.
Nancy Detra. What's the one sentence version of what you're doing?
Both the Manitou Project and Higher Ground Conservation Burial is doing eco-restoration and all kinds of wonderful things.
Fantastic. Can we get some woo? And what about you?
I don't have anything like
No, what do you?
That was an elevator.
Do you have a garden? You need someone to help you prune?
You know what? I am very involved with providing affordable, safe housing for people.
Woo! All right. Yes. One sentence.
Anna Klein, I'm working on local food movements and trying to get a sharing economy going here.
Tyler Gould, we're shutting down the nuclear power.
Wait, don't we need nukes? Okay. That's a debate we can have later. Yes.
Rediscovering hydroelectric power, like really old ones that are dormant because of the nuclear generation that wanted to the whole network, but the independence of hydroelectric.
Okay. So anyone wants to work on hydroelectric, come talk to?
I'm looking to.
Well, you can figure it out together. What's your name?
I'm House, but I don't know anything about hydroelectric.
All right. Well, someone who knows something about it, maybe come talk to House. Anybody else in the room want to share something they're working on that other people could join in on? Going once? Yes.
I also think I can't really join in unless my company hires them, but I'm a federal contractor, and so we do a lot of the implementation, even once there's the will of this. It's a lot of work and a lot of little tiny details and pushing at those.
Great. And your name?
Anna.
Anna. All right. Let's give Anna let's bring those. There's a lot of money for federal contracts. I believe I read the news in the last 2 or 3 years. So thank you. Bring it. And we're going to end with a chant, and then we'll let you all go, and I can sign books and etc. So the chant, it's going to feel weird, but we're going to do it together, people. All right. The chant, I'll start it. You guys join in. You'll get it. This is how we're going to end tonight. All right. What do we want? A better catastrophe. When do we want it? As late in the century as possible. What do we want?
A better catastrophe.
When do we want it?
As late in the century as possible.
What do we want?
A better catastrophe.
When do we want it?
As late as the century as possible.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Where can people find this chart?
Oh, yeah. This chart can be found at bettercatastrophe.com. You can download a digital version of it. There's small versions of it that you can draw on with dry erase markers and maybe bring into schools or your own, eco groups over there, and they're for sale. And there's a few books left, and I'll be signing books over there.
It's in the book.
It's in the book. Oh, yes, this is in the book. It folds out from the book. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.